This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is 2025 Together, directed by Michael Shanks, who I'm reasonably certain is not the Michael Shanks who starred in Stargate SG-1. Together stars Alison Brie and Dave Franco and is a body horror movie. And if you're at all familiar with the subgenre of horror called body horror, it's something that started with David Cronenberg with movies like Videodrome and Existence and so on and so forth. Though, by my reckoning, the best body horror movie wasn't made by Cronenberg. It was instead made by David Yasna with Society, which has some of the best practical body horror I've ever seen in movies. It is spectacularly good. Now, keep in mind something though. Society isn't a great movie. The writing is not wonderful. The acting is kind of wooden. But the special effects by Screaming Mad George are magnificent. If you have not seen Society, check it out. Especially if you're into body horror, because you will find nothing as interesting, as visually spectacular as what you get in Society. But in any case, we're talking about Together. And it's pretty good. Intercession Film on the movie poster describes it as the best horror movie of the year. And I have to say, I mostly agree. I want to say Together is, for about 95% of its run, indeed, the best horror film I've seen of 2025. It is really good. Dave Franco is a great actor. Alison Brie is game for anything. They're both game for anything. And this movie works really well. It is creepy. It is weird. The body horror aspects rely too strongly on CGI for my reckoning. Once again, I mentioned Society, which is all practical and all amazing. This, not so much. It looks interesting visually speaking, but a practical effect I think would have gone a long way to getting more of that ickiness across. If you're not at all familiar with the story of Together, it revolves around a couple played by Franco and Brie who are, I wouldn't say they're at a crossroads, but their relationship is trying to move to the next level. And Dave Franco's character is having difficulty with that transition. They're going to get a house together. They're moving out to the country. He plays in a band, and it's going to be more difficult for him. And he's trying to desperately to reconcile these two worlds, namely his love for his girlfriend with this change in life. And so they come upon the remnants of a place where a cult once visited. And this cult believed in the merging of couples to bring them closer together and so on and so forth. It mentions something about Greek myth, but it's really not important because the narrative doesn't really give why what's happening much room to breathe. It just happens. The reasoning is weak. It doesn't really make sense, which is a pity because if those blanks were filled, it would have went a long way towards making the film much more satisfying. As I mentioned earlier, Dave Franco and Alison Brie are great, but the narrative isn't as strong as their performances. You don't have any real background into bringing clarity to what's going on with them. So it just kind of happens. It doesn't really make any sense. And I think the narrative would have been stronger if that were more spelled out. Though the greatest weakness, by my reckoning, and why Together is not as perfect as could be, is the ending. Which I won't reveal, by the way. Go see Together. It's awesome. It's very good, despite the ending, which almost kills it. Because the movie is funny in a very dark way. It's not overtly humorous. There's no winking at the camera. It's taken very seriously. But the problem is the ending virtually sabotages all the goodwill that was built prior. And it's really interesting because Michael Shanks, I suspect, has never seen David Fincher 7. This should have had that ending. The fact that there was a reveal at the end of Together undermined all the goodwill that was built before. Now that doesn't make Together bad. It makes Together not as good as it could be. And that's a pity because Together is a really good movie, and that 5% works way too hard to undermine everything that came before. It turns what happened prior to a joke. Never mind, we're giving earlier very horrific examples of this process not quite working as it should. And so, once again, David Fincher 7, which had the perfect ending. In any case, that's not to say that Together isn't worth seeing. It is. It is a good time. Just forgive the ending. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Peace.